Let me tell you about this guy.
I'll tell you about this fucker right here.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court made some interesting decisions over the past couple of weeks.
Interesting. Is that another way of saying controversial?
They made some rulings. Yeah, I mean, everything's controversial nowadays. Whether it's right, wrong, or
really
different,
is.
Everything's controversial.
Everything, I'm going to blame the millennials on it, but everything is political, right? At least with the Gen X, it was like there was things that were politics and there's things that were just like football. But now everything is political.
Yes, including football.
Including football. And it's like stupid and it pisses me off. But anyway.
This really grinds your gears.
Well, I might be millennials more than boomers at this juncture. At least the boomers are dying off.
Yeah, so the latest Supreme Court rulings. So go ahead. I think I interrupted you. You were gonna tell us some things, educate us on the latest and greatest.
Yeah, so they ruled on. They're both really college related, college focused. The affirmative action, but and then this student loan, low battery, nice, and this student loan forgiveness plan that Biden issued, I think, the executive order that was ruled unconstitutional.
Okay. So, I want to take two perspectives on this. I want to take my
two topics. So.
Yeah. So I'll start with the affirmative action side, right? I'm going to speak from a perspective of I am obviously very pasty, very milky white. So, and I'm a male. So I am all the things that this affirmative action was not created for.
Right. The affirmative action would actually call you the problem.
Right. Exactly. So, I have an opinion, but I don't want it to be taken as like, oh, this is just the white man giving his opinion on something that doesn't really involve him, and he's just the tive, right? So, so we'll start there.
Okay.
So I think I'll just
it's your disclaimer.
Yeah. So that's my disclaimer. The reason why I say I've kind of got two perspectives on both of these aspects is because I've got a personal perspective, but I've also got I think I have the how Gen Z feels about the decision.
Okay. I think Gen Z probably hates it.
Yeah. So for Gen Z, I don't know if all of them hate it but like
just as the majority.
Yeah, but as like I believe the majority don't like the rulings on both of the decisions. I do think so. From a personal note, I do think that sometimes not just Gen Z, but just people in general forget what the Supreme Court is for and what their rulings are meant to be, instead of necessarily like these like, what do you call it? They're not like the social justice reform system. Right. They are making rulings based on the Constitution and whether or not things are constitutional.
Right. So a good example would be the abortion ruling, where everybody's saying the Supreme Court just went out and banned abortions, and it's like, that's not what happened at all. Supreme Court ruled that abortion was not a constitutional right. It's nowhere to be found in the Constitution, and therefore it became up to every state to make their own ruling on it. So it wasn't banned.
So I guess my personal point I'm trying to make is that it's not whether it should or shouldn't be a part of the Constitution. It's just, is it a part of the current constitutional right? Yes or no.
Correct.
Right? And so that's where I'm going to take the personal stance on the affirmative action, right?
And they came back with the answer is no, they could not find it in the Constitution.
Right. So that's where I'm going to take my stance on the affirmative action and my personal beliefs.
Okay.
I feel like, personally, that a person, no matter who they are, what they are, what helicopter they are, what, you know, how well they can or cannot drive or can see. I don't think that it should matter whether or not you're deciding they should come to your school. So I think that it should be based on their merit and not based on anybody's gender or race or...
Yeah, I think there's a lot of criteria that should be allowed, even beyond merit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you scored a 1,500 on your SAT and I scored a 1,400 on my SAT, and your parents are billionaires,
mm-hmm.
and my parents make a combined $35,000 a year,
mm-hmm.
I think it would be fair to say, you know what, we're going to give the slot to this person who's got the grades. Maybe the SAT scores are a little bit lower, but they're not going to be able to afford otherwise. So we're going to give this person the slot and a scholarship,
mm-hmm.
or a grant.
I guess that's what I mean, right? Like, mm-hmm. I guess to your point, and I think I see the point like you're trying to make, is in like taking all of the whole situation into account,
mm-hmm.
rather than just taking somebody's skin color or gender into account, taking the whole situation into account.
Absolutely. And it's just, I think the solution to the problem of providing opportunities to, I would say an oppressed people, because it's really we're focused on Black people who, you know, historically speaking, is not that far out of slavery, mm-hmm. right? Just a 250 years, something like that.
Sure, and it's not even that long that like...
that's just slavery, but
yeah,
then
that's
you
just
have
slavery,
like the
right.
Jim Crow laws and those types. Yeah. So their grandparents had to fight for they had the right, they didn't have the ability to vote, mm-hmm. in places. So that's what they were fighting for. So they didn't have the opportunities, and they wanted to create a situation to provide more opportunities. And I think that's noble, and I think it's got a truth and a rightness about it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that affirmative action was the right way of achieving that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got to be careful with who you give power, right? So if you give power to person A who says, you know what, we're going to make this rule and we're going to give all these benefits to Black people and these other people, right, get the benefits. But when person A comes out of power and they put person Z in power, now power is power. Now they can say, we're going to get rid of all these benefits for person A and we're going to give them to person B.
Right.
Now they get all the benefits, and, you know, is that really how we want it to be?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I think you've got to say, if the roles were reversed, if the person I hated had authority, would I be happy with them having that authority? If the answer is no, then don't give them that authority.
Right. So this is where, like, I think your perspective on this makes, I guess, has more weight and makes more sense, because like I said, like, the whole thing, right, is that my race and gender are the problem, right? Or why it was created, and
perceived problem,
right? Or the perceived problem. Whereas, you know, you being the prime candidate for that.
Well, kind of. So I'm not Black. Well, I haven't done a DNA test, but I'm guessing. I'm not. If I had to put money on Vegas, I would say I'm not Black. All right. I'm rolling.
You go for red, huh?
I'm rolling with yellow. All right. Yeah. As long as we stick with colors, Black, white, yellow, brown.
Uh-huh.
So I'm in red. Mm-hmm. I'm rolling with yellow on this one. That's what I think my DNA test will come back as. I think the way affirmative action is intentionally originally designed was to help minorities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, Black was the focused minority. You had the NAACP, which was really focused on Black. Even though it says colored people, they're really about Black people. And, you know, they were at the time one of the larger and more oppressed minorities, mm-hmm. right? So I understand it. But affirmative action actually harmed Asians.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually harder for an Asian to get into college than it is for a white person to get into college.
Because they were
overrepresented.
Okay.
All right. So, because
the whole affirmative action thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is basically you're taking what the population is or what you have currently, and you're trying to make it match the population.
You're trying to get some equal representation.
Right.
Right. And I kind of understand it. I think it's false in the sense that you want diversity of color. I don't think that's nearly as important as diversity of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel colleges give a damn about diversity of thought. I think they actually are against diversity of thought at this juncture. But the diversity of affirmative action was try to make things more fair, because they weren't real fair,
right?
All right, by representation. So they're like, how can we make this more fair so it looks more represented? I just think it's flawed to try to start that at college. You want things more fair. You want more minorities represented in colleges. I think you got to work at the elementary, middle, and high schools.
Right.
Right.
So you need to start at the beginning rather than starting at where most people, that's the end of their school life. And
and take a multivariate analysis. Don't just go predominantly black and the grades are bad. Right. Okay. I can see where that can be a problem, but I could also say, hey, everybody that lived beyond 1 year had drinking water and they all died. So water is bad.
Right.
Right. So we can't do that. So we have to go into
you're basically like, doesn't like causation doesn't equal correlation.
Exactly.
Right? Like it just because, 60 people ate an apple and then they all got bit by a shark, that means sharks like people that eat apples.
Right,
like
exactly.
you're just jumping to a conclusion based on like a causation event rather than
where did they get bit by a shark? On the ankle? No. I mean, were they all in the same body of water?
Right.
Were they all chumming and then they jumped into the chum? What happened here? Right. And so that's really what I think people should look at, because if we say it has bad results, okay, let's look at that. Where else has bad results? Are there similarities? And how about we look at poverty? Because I bet my bottom dollar, speaking of poverty, I bet my bottom dollar that poverty is common throughout all of it.
So do you feel like these things just taking affirmative action, for an example, these things that people try to do to make things more equal are actually the lazy approach rather than the actual like analytical, let's take our time and figure out? Or do you think that it's not really lazy, it's just like we need to do something right now, so like let's implement this to get it going?
I don't think it's lazy. I think it's been thought through too much for it to be lazy. I think it is misguided, and maybe groupthink.
I think it also may be under or not. There are things that over time you need to reevaluate and put benchmarks to, and like, is this still working? Does this still apply? Where in X year this was come up with, whatever the situation is 50 years ago, does it still apply? Does it still make sense for our current situation? And I think that there's times where, and I don't know if that's necessarily that this is the case with this specific ruling, but I think there's times where you need to like reanalyze and like, okay, this is the current situation we're in. Does it still make sense to apply this to get the outcome that you're trying to achieve?
I agree. I'm not sure that really applies here because it was just a Supreme Court ruling, but people do like to make laws based on things happening in the world around them, and it makes sense. I mean, in 1865, we probably did not need a whole lot of wireless communication laws, right? The problem is there's no mechanism in government to go back and get rid of laws that no longer apply.
Right.
And maybe it's time for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no mechanism for removing rules that you created during this circumstance that don't need to be there anymore. There's lots of mechanisms for just creating new ones. But then those new ones contradict with old ones and things like that because you don't get rid of the old ones and they just don't apply anymore. So
yeah. So I'm fine with the affirmative action ruling. I think media has made it a bigger deal than it really is, because I think if we just look at the numbers, the number of people that benefited from affirmative action was really small based on population. You know, it's not like it impacted half the country. They're looking at maybe 3% of people benefited from affirmative action. And do we want to have a change in the constitutional to benefit 3% of the population? I kind of lean towards no.
Well, and I think that's something that the population should
and
decide for themselves.
And there is a mechanism in our republic to do these things, right? So if enough states believe that affirmative action should be legal, you go through a constitutional amendment process, and then all the states gets involved and you have the vote, and then if it's really that popular, then it becomes an amendment, like just all the other amendments to the Constitution.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I think that I think it kind of comes back to like what we said at the beginning, right? Where people get confused based on what the ruling actually, it's not ruling like this is a law now or this is not a law now. It's just we couldn't find this in our current set of laws and constitutions. And so it's not a constitutional right currently.
Correct.
So people spin that as like, oh, well, now it's just now it's no longer a thing. And it's like, well, it can be. It's just up to the local community now rather than.
People think they have more rights than they really have. What they have is more freedoms, not necessarily rights. So you run things up against the Constitution and you measure it. Is this in violation of the Constitution?
Well, in the Constitution, that's why there is a system to add amendments and things like that, because as people develop and decide that they, we as a society that like this should be a right, not just a law, but a right that cannot be broken, then you have the process to go and add so, that.
If you look at rights, if you have a right, you should not need to pay for that.
Right.
Because it's a right. So those are the arguments I think people should be making and remaking. So if you have the right, if you have a constitutional right to get married, you should not have to pay for the privilege of executing that right, which means you should not have to pay the state to get a marriage license. Because if you had to pay the state to get a marriage license, it's no longer a right. It's really a privilege that if you have money, you can do it.
Right. So
I would use that as a criteria for everything that you consider a right.
So that kind of goes into the next ruling, right? And kind of plays into that a little. So they made a similar ruling about whether or not it was legal and constitutional for Joe Biden to basically forgive the student loans. And their ruling was that you're not allowed to do that. Under the law that you chose that gives you the power to do this, you can't do that.
Yeah, you don't have the authority.
Right. You don't have the authority to do so. And so, again, just a reminder for everybody that's probably getting upset right now. It's not a ruling of if this is right or wrong. It's a ruling of this is the law that you said you could do it with, and this has nothing to do with this, or we as a system don't feel like it's legal for you to do that, right? It's not this was right for you to do, so we vote on what's
right. And then also just bear in mind, laws are universal, not situational. Authority is universal, not situational. So do you want your president to have the right to forgive all student loans? Maybe you do. Now, let's say Donald Trump becomes president again. Do you want him to have the right to forgive all commercial loans? All banks, forgiven. You owe us nothing. You know, do you want him to have that right? I don't. You know, so be careful what you're supporting.
Yeah, they do have to be very careful about what they're saying yes to and what they're saying no to, because it translates down, right? People use the cases as the final say in similar situations, so that when this case comes up again, or this situation comes up again, it's like, well, this was the ruling. So I, as a judge, as a lower court judge, am not going to go up against the ruling of the higher court judge. This is what the ruling was. It applies to this situation.
Yeah, the precedent. Now, and with the Supreme Court, here's the nuance with the Supreme Court. So you can argue something to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will hear that specific argument and rule the constitutionality of it. You could come back to the same subject matter, but argue from a different point, and then they can get overruled because you're arguing a different point. And now suddenly, because you're arguing this thing, it's like, you're right, this is unconstitutional instead of constitutional. So that's how that works.
Yeah. And then it's up to various people to decide which situation applies to which scenario you're in.
Yeah, or just a creative lawyer to have the mind to make a unique argument.
Yeah. But anyway, so my point is, right, so going back to the Gen Z perspective on the student loans thing, right? There are a lot of people my age who are in a serious amount of debt that they signed up for when they were 17 years old, because their school counselor and all these people around them said, you should do this because it's good for you, and all of these things, right? Not trying to victimize, just playing out a more realistic scenario, right? So now they're in a huge amount of debt for a job that they don't want, or a degree that they don't want or have any passion to continue doing, and they have to bear that for the rest of their life in their financial situation. I think the difference is that there are a lot of things in like the country, when you do your research and things like that, that maybe cost wise were and were not so different when somebody was a kid versus what they make now. One of those big things that I would argue is education. And I would argue that there is an insane cost difference for education and higher education versus
if you go to private school.
Even just normal general community college is extremely expensive compared to what it used to cost. And those two numbers do not correlate with what people make now versus what education costs. You also have this giant push for people to just be able to take out loans. There's no loan that I can get at 17 years old except for an educational loan where I can take out $200,000 and be forced to pay that back for the rest of my life without somebody else siding with you. But that seems to be one of the ones that you can just go willy-nilly on and take out as much as you want.
So maybe the law should make the parent co-sign if they're going to let the do it at 17.
I think you just I think the student loan thing, I think you're trying to address I think you're trying to address for optics, right? This is what my party believes, so let's just like follow along on this trail. And we're trillions of dollars in debt, so let's just follow along this trail that we know nobody's going to actually go for. But I think you're just attacking the wrong side, right? The quality of education versus what you're actually paying for the education and the amount you're paying for education. I think that's the side that you need to tackle, and not necessarily like let's just make everybody else pay for somebody else's mistake.
Again, just like, if we're going to forgive that loan, are we going to forgive all homeowners loans? Houses were so much cheaper back in 1978 than they are now. And even though we make more, we don't make as much we don't make the same ratio more as the housing. So maybe all homeowners should have their loans forgiven, and they should own their houses free and clear, right? I'm sorry, I say bullshit to that too, right?
Right. And my point wasn't like
we can't as a society remove consequences or repercussions to decisions that we make. Ultimately, the bottom line comes down to this person knew they're taking a loan and they're going to have to pay it back. Bad. I hit that button. So, but they said, you want to get this loan and go to college, you're going to have to pay all of it back. And the person said, yes. All right. You're on the hook for it. There's people in 1990 who joined the army because they wanted the college fund. They didn't want to go to war. Then Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And next thing you know, they're in the desert and they're going, I didn't sign up for this. Yes, you did. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I'm sorry. And I do agree with you. We're trying to like forgive the debt, but we're not solving the problem. And one, I don't think the loan is as much as a problem as how the interest is factored.
Yeah.
So if you want to forgive anything, just turn student loans into zero interest. I think you'll get more support for that than just to forgive the loan as a whole.
Right.
And then when the interest rate is zero, at least the borrower can feel a sense of hope. You know, it's like, oh, okay, I can tackle this because, you know, my payments after 1 year is beginning to make a little bit of a difference and dent, you know. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not New Jersey, so it's going to be something good.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think that also you're, you know, as a society, we're putting the burden on the highest form of government to fix that issue of loans rather than your local politician going, okay, so hang on. So my area is extremely poor. And then now I'm supporting all of these kids going and taking on $200,000s of dollars to go to this school. So they're more poor. And then they move back home with their parents. And so now my area is still poor. And then just ending up in this cycle.
Right.
Rather than how can I properly educate to make sure that, you know, my area makes the right decisions. And, you know, there's actually benefit to making the right decisions in my community and supporting proper community education rather than, you know.
And maybe there needs to be some loan criteria. Like, you're going to get a student loan from a college. We got to make sure that the degree you're getting has a marketable reason for it. You know, there's no market for underwater basket weaving. There's no market for a master's degree in Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and that kind of
underwater basket weaving is important. That's what made this country great, Mike. Underwater basket weaving.
So there's a lot of...
Don't insult my culture like that.
I get to. I'm Asian, so I get to say anything I want about your culture. I just use my minority card.
Yeah, there you go.
But if you took a student loan and ran it through the same kind of thought process as other loans, like, this person wants this money, to borrow this money, I want to make that money back. What evidence is there that I'm going to be able to get this thing back? Well, they're going to get this degree. So like if it's a house, they're going to have this house and I have collateral on the house. Well, they're going to get this education. So I have collateral on the education. What are they doing with that education? Oh, they're going to be a businessman. They're going to create the next Twitter. They're going to, you know, whatever. Yeah, and then they're going to be able to pay it back.
It's an interesting scenario because like you just kind of brought up with like the house or like you get a loan on a car or whatever. If you don't pay that, you lose your house or you lose your car. No one can make you lose the education that you just went through.
That's why they don't allow that loan to go into bankruptcy,
right,
or to be forgiven in 7 years like bankruptcy is, and that kind of stuff. That's why it stays with you forever, because they can't take it back.
Right.
So, but how about make it a requirement that in order to get a loan, you're going to actually have to have a marketable skill to prove that you can pay it back. You can't get a business loan and they look at your business model and they go, yeah, that's not going to work.
Well, and I think the loan thing kind of comes back to when we were talking about the affirmative action stuff. You're just tackling the wrong area, right? Why can my area not afford to at least go to community college? And why do they've got to take a loan to be able to do that?
And they have what I know is running start programs. So if you're worth your salt in high school, you can do the running start and get college credits in community college. So you graduate high school with your associate's degree. Now you only need 2 years of university to get your bachelor's.
Yeah, and I think the problem with those programs is they're just not as supported anymore. Like you have this really big push to go, like what you mentioned earlier, to these private colleges and these Ivy League schools and things like that, because you want this piece of paper to look shiny and sparkly on your resume. And so you have this push for those, and sure, you earn like some credit, but you only earn credit towards specific programs at specific schools and not just like general credit that applies everywhere. And I think that's part of the problem too, is you have these schools that are pushing like these Ivy League credits that only count for these 10 schools rather than pushing for the general credits.
There's accreditation organizations. I think there's like 5 of them now. That set the criteria of what is accredited and what transfers over and that kind of stuff. And so you could work within those, constraints. But also I think there's too much demand for college. There's a lot of jobs out there that don't need a college degree, but businesses like ask for the college degree.
Right.
It's like, it makes you well-rounded. And don't even get me started on the well-rounded thing, because there's a lot of ways to get well-rounded that is not socially acceptable, evidently.
Yeah, you can be like me. Eat food.
It's like you're telling me this 23-year-old with a bachelor's degree is well-rounded because of their college experience. And you're saying, oh, because they took this variety of classes and they got to meet a variety of people. I was like, well, this soldier has gone to all of these countries. They face stresses and obstacles that none of these people will ever even imagine, but they're not well-rounded.
Right.
All right. And screw your argument.
Yeah. Yeah. We classify well-rounded as taking 6 different math classes and social studies classes and things like that. But they've never learned how to like do their taxes, but they're well-rounded.
Yeah. And then there's vocational options also, but nobody wants to talk about the vocational options at the high school level. It's still, the high school system is all geared to promote the universities. And so it's one of those of, if you don't get good grades, you'll be a loser, like that pipe fitter over there. It's like, that pipe fitter has 0 debt and he's in his first year of pipe fitting and he's making $20 an hour and you're $100,000 in debt.
Right.
I think the pipe fitter is smarter.
Yeah. And so like you said, I don't know. I feel like the summary, it just all comes back down to tackling the problem at your source areas rather than trying to tackle it from above.
And honestly, I still think maybe if you want to be creative with the solution, businesses that require a college degree pays for the student loan.
Yeah, you have some
while they're working year for year.
Right.
Or month for month. Every month that you work with them, they make that monthly payment and you just have to like slide that information, your college information over to them, in the interview process. And I think it helps because if you want that private Ivy League school for $250,000, then, maybe this company is going to hire that person that went to a community college because it's cheaper for them. And now blue collar is getting more opportunities instead of legacy opportunities from old money.
Yeah. Yeah. And and the flip side of that too is that now you have, the business. They now no longer require a bachelor's degree to be the receptionist.
Exactly.
And to take phone calls. Yeah. Like, that's going to be really expensive. Or we could just, take somebody with a high school degree that doesn't cost us anything and put them as the receptionist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And And then less people have to go to college, so the demand decreases. If you go with the laws of supply and demand, when there's low demand, then there's too much supply, then prices go down to increase the demand. So yeah, I mean, definitely ways of tackling it if you want to be creative. I just don't think you can just willy-nilly out there and say, suddenly nobody has to pay their loans.
And even if you do that, right, suddenly nobody has to pay their loans, you help a span of 5 to 10 years of people, and then you still have the same situation.
Absolutely.
Right?
Because
the loans don't actually go away. These group of people don't have to pay them. And now all of millennials and Gen Z's kids still have to take the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of loans. And
suddenly all of the soon-to-be college freshmen are going, wait a minute, they don't have to pay their loans, but suddenly I do.
Yeah, right.
How's that fair?
Yeah, it just doesn't. It doesn't fix the senior in high school's problem now, because great, all their loans were waived. Now I'm starting college and I got to take them. And
you help 10 years of people. You help one generation, and honestly, there's no such thing as free. So all those loans do get paid back through the population. And so it's all the people in high school are going to be paying for all those people who just got their degree, that year and 10 years prior.
Yeah, because let's be honest, it's not coming out of the boomers' pocket.
No, they've already been clever enough to stash their monies into trust funds and that kind of stuff. And honestly, income tax only applies when you have an income. So if you have no income, you just have, money stashed that you're...
Well, if you have money stashed and you stay in the job and keep the income, now you have both places where you have money.
So, yep.
Yeah. Well, yep.
That's my take.
Dip, hot take, hot Mike's takey hot.
I don't know what that means.
Mike's takey hots. Hot takes.
Hot takes and hot cakes.
Hot takes and hot cakes. Fuck the boomers and fuck your generation.
Absolutely. Peace be the journey.
Thanks, guys.